Suicide is a common topic in news headlines. Poor coverage in the media is one of the many things that can lead to suicide. There is more and more evidence that covering suicide in the media in a responsible way can help prevent suicides. When someone dies by suicide, it affects not only the person and their family, but also the whole community. Simplifying, speculating, and shaming individuals for a fatal decision that involved many factors serves no purpose and puts the risk on individuals who are already at high risk. Therefore, it is important to report it responsibly. In practice, this can be hard, especially when discussing a complex topic like suicide. As we begin our journey, I would like you to pause to consider these questions for yourself. Is it likely that conversations about suicide in publications, personal stories, and press narratives can have a profound impact? Can a person's choice to live or die be affected by what they see or hear? Is it possible that one person's suicide could cause another? How much do you think the media is to blame for the suicide crisis? For the first time in many years, the pieces of the suicidology puzzle are beginning to fit together. Numerous media effects, whether harmful, helpful, or neutral, appear to be impacted by individual level factors and information delivered. When it comes to journalism, a media corporation's goal is to sell stories. A reporter's job is to get people to pay attention to these stories. The convergence of these interests produce a lot of sensationalism in the media. Several research studies worldwide have shown that certain types of news coverage can increase the risk of suicide in people who are already at risk. It is called as suicide contagion. The rise is proportional to how much, how long, and how visible the coverage there is. Vulnerable people is the term used to describe individuals already at high risk. People who are already thinking about suicide can be affected by suicide contagion. They may have a mental illness, a drug or alcohol problem, be on many medications, be involved in a conflict, trying to make ends meet, or having difficulty dealing with everyday stresses of life. Most of the time, they deal with a combination of challenges. People who already want to kill themselves can be triggered to do it. How? By seeing graphic photos, knowing details of how the suicide happened, as if it were the final push for those already on the edge. Remember, blunt words have the sharpest edge. The trigger effect will be stronger if attributing suicide to a single event, describing the method and location in detail, revealing the contents of suicide notes, using the term suicide in the headline, publishing picture of the person who died by suicide, and portraying the person's behavior as heroic and ideal. Vulnerable people can relate to the person described in the news story, who could be a co-worker, classmate, or a community member. Local suicides that aren't carried out in the usual way are way more likely to make it to the news than those that are. Novel suicide methods are appealing to some. Sadly, these methods are also often highly fatal. It is worrying because people behaving suicidally after hearing about it in the news also copy the way it was done. They imitate the suicidal actions. It is why copycat suicide is another common name for suicide contagion. In the social sciences and medicine, the term Werther effect refers to the suicidal behavior caused by people copying what they see in the media. For the Werther effect to happen, a person must be vulnerable before being exposed to the media content. The Werther effect peaks 3 days following the first documented suicide case coverage and declines quickly after a month, but it can persist for years. In vulnerable individuals, suicide stories can either prompt and open genetically pre-programmed mental representations or trigger already held beliefs, which is the beginning of the behavioral part of social learning. Even though mental and emotional challenges don't directly change behavior, they make people more likely to get stressed in the future. Stories in the media about suicide could cause individuals to take their own lives through a sleeper effect or a subconscious memory of the stories. The Werther effect is stronger when people are younger. Even though adolescence is tough on its own, teen sensitivity to copycat behaviors could also be caused by their normal tendency to identify with peers and icons. This is because their brains develop at different rates and have less control over their developing brains working. Especially when young people die, their deaths affect the whole community and can sometimes lead to a lot of grief, which journalists may want to cover. Young people may also be more likely to overreact to stories about suicide, which can trigger suicidal thoughts and behaviors. One study found that suicides among young people, especially 15 to 24 years, were 3 times more likely to be reported in the news than the actual suicides among people in this age group. When young people talk too much about suicide, it may make people in this age group more likely to try to kill themselves. Imitating suicide seems to be more common among younger people. So, journalists should know that copycat suicides are most likely to happen among young people because of what they see in the media. Research shows that people who have recently tried to kill themselves are more likely to say that media articles made them feel that way when they are experiencing signs of serious depression. Depression is also a potentiator of the Werther effect early on. The mood of the audience has a big effect on the effect of psychosocial factors that lead to suicidal thoughts. Depression, low self-esteem, or pessimism, all of which are affected by the larger social climate, would make people more open to learning from others and eventually more likely to copy them. People who want to kill themselves often go back and forth between wanting to living and dying. Hence, messages from the environment, like those from the media, are especially important for people during the times of crisis. People who are more vulnerable deal with media content about suicide differently than those who are less vulnerable. Research backs up the fact that some things about the quality of reporting may cause a short-term rise in suicides in some groups. When people over-identify with celebrities or high-profile individuals, media coverage of their suicides increases suicidal fatalities in the general population. There are frequently significant similarities between the suicide methods used by celebrities and the suicide methods employed by the general public. For example, after a famous Bollywood actor died in 2020, reportedly by suicide, a lot of media, especially TV channels, didn't leave any stone unturned in their speculation about the situation, including the possible ways he killed himself, his mental health diagnosis, with no regard for privacy or sensitivity. After the incident, research studies found that several suicide attempts and suicides had used similar methods to what was reported in the news. When American actor and comedian Robin Williams died in 2014, the number of suicides using the same method of hanging jumped by 32% in the months following his death. Especially when it comes to getting the word out about new ways to kill oneself, media coverage can have a big impact. The suicide rate in Hong Kong reached its all-time high of 18.8 per 1 lakh people in 2003 when charcoal burning went from being a new and unusual way to kill oneself to the second most common way. Taiwanese researchers found link between the number of charcoal suicides that were reported and the number of people who used the same method the next day. Each news story was linked to a 16% rise in suicides the next day. Chan et al. In 2005 found that almost everyone had heard about the method from news stories about people trying to kill themselves by burning charcoal in a new way. Reports say that on April 1st, 2003, Hong Kong Canadian singer and actor Leslie Chung jumped from a hotel window in Hong Kong Central. After he died, there were more suicides by jumping at the beginning of April. Most of the people who died were around the same age. The largest documented copycat impact occurred in October 2008 when popular Korean actress Jin Soo Choi died by suicide. After considering socio-demographic characteristics, there were 429 suicides amidst the widespread media coverage of her death. Suicide contagion is real. How we communicate, compose, or comment on mental health and suicide makes a difference. Most people skim the headlines. When someone is already having difficulty believing in themselves, seeing sensationalized headlines and hearing about a famous person who died by suicide can make them think that they can do it too. That it's all right. It's the best way to avoid suffering. Not only that, but finding out how someone killed themselves shows them what works. People stuck in a very painful situation who can't think of a way out may find a solution to their problem in a news story. Grief from the whole community, wanting to talk or write about the dead in almost sad ways, memorials or ceremonies held to honor the lives and undue political attention are all fairly common. Unfortunately, for someone who only sees pain, loneliness, and rejection, this level of hero worship might seem better than the current situation. Take a moment to think about this. Is it your experience that news coverage of suicides, especially those with newsworthy elements like celebrity suicides, suicide pacts, suicide clusters, or new methods, tend to follow a pattern in which incidents are widely reported as soon as they become public, with increased pressure to cover the story quickly, fueled by the need to put them on the front pages with a sensational tone? How can the media help prevent people from killing themselves? The media has greatly affected how people see and react to health risks like smoking, not wearing seat belts, and driving drunk. The rise and fall of smoking is a great example of how powerful the media can shape our thoughts and actions. The drop in the number of people who smoked between 1964 and 2012 saved about 8 million lives in the United States. Most of the credit for this change goes to the media and how they changed their messages as people learned more about how smoking hurts their health. Media campaigns helped make the initiative successful, despite what most people think that media has to be blamed for promoting smoking for many years. The way people think about the dangers of smoking has changed a lot because of good journalism. That shows the media's power, both in print and on the air. Contrary to the Werther effect, the Papageno effect is the positive effect that the news, social media, movies, TV shows, books, blogs, and theater can have when they report on suicides responsibly and promote non-suicide solutions to problems. When it comes to media-related Papageno effects that keep people from dying by suicide, stories about real-life experiences and resources that offer treatment and intervention options seems to be most helpful. Studies show that reporting suicide safely and appropriately lowers the chance of it spreading and makes people who need help more likely to ask for it. People may learn from the media about the problems that can make a person helpless and the signs that a person is having trouble getting by. It can encourage people to ask for help by pointing out the benefits of talking to someone. The media can help save lives by not making suicide seem like an option or make it normal or by promoting it as a way to deal with problems. Individual suicidal crises are greatly affected by the media. It is a pretty solid conclusion from the research that has been done up to this point. People with a suicidal crisis aren't sure what to do, so they may be open to suggestions in both directions. The effects of Werther and Papageno are at the opposite ends of the spectrum. Depending on how it is portrayed, the number of suicides can go up or down. Journalists have a tough job when they have to deal with suicide. They have to find a balance between the need to report of the moment news in the public interest and the need not to reveal potentially harmful information or trigger people who are sad or upset. Journalists should be aware of what people who are grieving or shocked need. They should carefully handle the reporting process and consider the needs and wants of those who have lost a family member. It's important not to get in the way of someone's grief or shock because sympathy, support, and sensitivity are essential in this situation. Still, journalists should be aware that if they don't take care when reporting on suicide, vulnerable people are at much higher risk of getting hurt or dying. Remember, responsible reporting can save lives. As we conclude this module, think about this. Increased reporting increases the risks of inaccurate reporting and may lead to an increase in suicides. So, does it help not to report suicides at all? Suicides aren't reported enough in Australia, Austria, and Switzerland. After learning about the ill effects of irresponsible reporting, we think reporters' lack of interest in suicide stories and the media's lack of coverage of suicides may be a good way to prevent suicide. If reporters aren't interested in suicide stories, they may be less likely to cover them, reducing the risk of suicide imitation and clusters. On the contrary, if suicides doesn't get the optimal attention in the media, it may make people think that suicide isn't as a big of a deal as it once was, making the key stakeholders less likely to work on suicide prevention. Also, if the media focuses more attention on teen suicide, the risk of suicide among middle-aged and older adults may be understated. It can make people less likely to do research and other things to keep these age groups from dying by suicide. When reporting on suicide, the media must find a way to balance the public's right to know and the need to keep people from copying what they see. People can learn more about suicide, who is most likely to do it, and how to stop it with the help of the media. When the media talks about suicide in a way that shows how bad the problem is and who it affects the most, it can help communities figure out how to use their resources to stop suicide. It may also make people more sensitive to each other, which can help find signs of suicide and keep people from killing themselves. Underreporting of suicide compared to how often it happens and certain types of overreporting may be bad for suicide prevention. Because stories about suicide in the media can increase the risk of suicide in some situations, researchers and policymakers have come up with guidelines for reporting on suicide. The media have known about these rules and guidelines for a long time. Researchers and policymakers are working on finding the best and the most effective ways to send suicide reporting tips to the media officials and reporters on the ground. One way is to give people who want it training about media and mental health. And that is what this training is all about. Even though people in the media want to follow the norms, many things stop them from doing so. There are worries about press freedom and giving people what they want, newsworthy stories. Nonetheless, adherence to good media practices lowers suicide rates. Leading mental health and suicide prevention professionals and media organizations have joined forces to provide research-based suggestions on reporting suicide safely. The recommendations aim to save lives by promoting accurate and responsible ethical reporting and not censorship. They act like a compass, providing media professionals in the right directions and giving them a framework to help them stay on track. It makes it possible for media professionals to report suicide responsibly. Austria was one of the first places to create and use rules for how the media should report on suicide. But it's not the only country where media recommendations have helped. Research done in countries with media guidelines such as the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, India, Japan, Korea, it has improved the quality of reporting. In the next module, we examine how local and international media rules might serve as a guiding light, guiding the reporting on delicate topics like suicide.